Spider-Man Brand New Day picks up 4 years after the events of No Way Home. Peter Parker is on his own in New York now, and nobody remembers who he is anymore. Because, as you recall, at the end of No Way Home, to stop a catastrophic multiversal crisis, Peter made the heartbreaking decision to ask Doctor Strange to cast a global memory-wiping spell. Now, this voodoo magic spell completely erased the memory of Peter Parker from the minds of everyone on Earth, including his best friends, Ned and MJ. Consequently, they forgot he even existed. This sacrifice allowed MJ and Ned to safely move on to college at MIT, while leaving Peter entirely alone and isolated in New York, forced to carry the private weight of his secret identity completely on his own. Now, Peter is fully living like a monk and adulting, doing the Spider-Man life at this point, and the isolation has really changed him. Now, this is where the writers really lean into the weight of being alone, and you can feel how much that loneliness is weighing on him. So, if you're single in your mid to late 20s, this film may feel a bit heavier. And on top of that, Peter starts dealing with some unexpected changes in his powers that make everything feel a little bit more unstable. Hormones, I guess. As that's happening, a new threat shows up in the city, and Spider-Man ends up crossing paths with some familiar faces as he tries to figure out how to deal with all this new stuff. The film is directed by Destin Daniel Cretton. It's written by McKenna and Eric Sommers, starring Tom Holland, Zendaya, John Bernthal, Mark Ruffalo, Michael Mando, Jacob Batalon, Sadie Sink, and Tramo Tillman. It's filmed by cinematographer Brett Pollack, and the score was composed by Michael Giacchino. This film is 2 hours, 25 minutes long, so make sure you have the Runtime app handy, and it's PG-13 for all the swearing and violence. This will be Tom Holland's fourth solo Spider-Man film and the beginning of a new chapter rather than a direct continuation of the previous trilogy's structure. So we're taking a non-spoiler look at Spider-Man Brand New Day. I'm Rob. We look at sci-fi, horror, action, adventure, pop culture, and all things geek. Hit like and subscribe. This is a constantly racing mind where every frame tells a story. So let's just get into it. Quick reminder, this is a non-spoiler review, no plot details. If it's in the trailer, it's in the review. So for now, the vibe, what did work and what didn't work for me, a bit about the craft and my rating, and there is an additional scene after the credits, so stay seated. It's not much, but stay seated anyway. What stood out to me the most is that this is a lot more grounded and emotional than the last few Spider-Man movies. While I did like the other films, they did not leave me completely impressed. In this film, Peter's not being pulled around as Stark Kid anymore. He's just trying to survive, keep his head above water, and hold on to who he is. In other words, he's not a kid anymore. He's a man in his late 20s who is trying to find his way back to what is important to him. There's a rough street-level energy to it that I do really like. It has all the big superhero spectacle you'd want, but it also feels more personal and a little bit more lived in this time around. And it should. He's been Spider-Man for 10 years now, and Holland, as an actor, has grown immensely. As noted in my Odyssey review, he seems more mature and a better actor. In this film, the suit looks great. It feels more tactile and practical, and that really helps sell Spider-Man as a physical presence in the world. There's something about the way it moves and catches the light that makes it feel more real. The action also is a big step up. This one leans harder into practical swinging, hand-to-hand chaos, and those creative Spider-Man fight ideas that make the character so fun when he's at his best. I'll say a bit more later. As I said, I thought Tom Holland is fantastic in this movie. This seems to me his strongest performance as Peter Parker because he really sells how heavy everything is for him this time around. You can feel how alone Peter is, how much he's carrying, and how far removed he is from the version of the character we started with. What I liked most is how clearly he separates Peter from Spider-Man. When he's Peter, he feels tired, hurt, and completely worn down by everything he's lost. When he puts the suit on, there's a different energy there. More movement, more confidence, more of that Spider-Man wit coming through, even though you can still feel the pain underneath it. The practical suit helps a lot too. It makes the performance feel more physical, and Holland does a great job using his eyes, his posture, and just the way he moves to get the emotion across. Even when he's masked up, you still feel what Peter's going through. And the chemistry is there. His scenes with Zendaya land because of everything that history means, even when they're not on the same page anymore. And the back and forth with John Bernthal's Punisher gives the movie a really fun dynamic that I think a lot of people are going to like and some maybe not so much. As far as negatives, I wouldn't say there's much here that takes away from his performance. If anything, it just feels like Peter at his most isolated, and Holland really understands how to play that. Another thing I liked about Spider-Man Brand New Day is John Bernthal. As he's a huge part of what makes this movie work for me, his Punisher is intense, funny, and a lot more layered than I expected, and the chemistry he has with Tom Holland really gives the movie a different kind of energy. The other thing I kind of liked is that Frank Castle doesn't just feel like the heavy, brutal side of the story. He also brings a weird, almost unexpected sense of humor to it. That back and forth between him and Peter is one of the movie's biggest surprises, and it actually mostly works because Bernthal commits to it so well. There's this sharp contrast between how these two operate, and that makes every scene they share more interesting. They seem to be playing off the natural chemistry as behind-the-scenes friends, and the dynamic between Peter and the Punisher is one of the more interesting parts of the movie. The kind of clash of personalities has a lot of potential, especially when Spider-Man is forced to bounce off someone as intense as Frank Castle. Now, at the same time, Frank also feels like a really important emotional presence for Peter in this story, because Peter is isolated and Frank becomes this unlikely support system for him, even if that relationship is messy and complicated. That's what makes their dynamic stand out to me. It's not just action or banter, it feels like Peter is being forced to confront a completely different way of living. I think Frank also works really well as a thematic mirror to Peter. He's what happens when someone gives in completely to the darkness and the violence, while Peter is still trying to hold on to the human side of himself. That contrast gives the character a real purpose in the story behind just being there for cool Punisher moments. All that being said, I did have one issue. It's that the movie does soften the Punisher a little more than I expected. I get why they did it, but there's moments where Peter seems a little too comfortable around Frank for my taste, especially considering who Frank Castle is and what he represents. Some of the dynamic between them also leans a little more playful than I think it needed to be. It's funny, it works to a point, but I can see Punisher fans feeling like the movie is smoothing out the edges of him too much. Remember, he is the Punisher. And yeah, there are probably some logic questions if you think too hard about how Frank is just able to operate the way he does here. It's not something that totally takes me out of the movie, but it's kind of a thing that makes me raise an eyebrow. I'm kind of thinking Lobo from Supergirl, just popping in and popping out. And Zendaya is really good in this. What stands out most to me is how much weight she gives MJ, even when she's not the center of the story. There's a quietness to her performance that works really well, especially in the scenes with Peter, because you can feel the history there even when she doesn't know who he is. And the chemistry between her and Tom is still one of the strongest parts of these movies. That's what makes her scenes hit so hard. Peter remembers everything, and MJ doesn't. So every interaction carries that extra layer of tension. Zendaya does a really nice job making it. MJ feels like more than just a supporting character here too. She still has that dry, slightly awkward energy, but she also feels more grown up and more settled into her own life. And there's a reason for that. I also like that the movie gives her room to actually do something instead of just having her sit around waiting on Peter's story. It makes her feel earned in the movie, but not just dropped in for the sake of it. So if you saw my review of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, then you know that Holland, Zendaya, and Bernthal all starred in that film as Telemachus, Athena, and Menelaus. Go figure. Now, the biggest issue for me is the pacing. This movie is long, and there are definitely a couple of stretches where you can feel it working a little too hard to keep everything moving. It also feels overloaded at times. There's a lot packed in here, and not every piece of it gets the breathing room it needs. That's especially true early on when the movie has to do a lot of setup before it really settles in. I also think some of the supporting stuff doesn't hit as hard as it could. A few characters and plot threads feel like they were just there because the movie had to make room for them, not because they were doing a ton for the story. And if I'm being honest, some of the late MCU-style crossover stuff can feel a little forced. It's not enough to ruin the movie, but it does make parts of it feel busier than I think that needed to be. Destin Daniel Cretton steps in to direct this Spider-Man movie after John Watts handled all three of Tom Holland's previous solo films. Cretton made a name for himself with films like Short Term 12, The Glass Castle, Just Mercy, and Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. And a lot of his films center on hurt, isolated people trying to find their way back to family, community, or themselves. That makes him a really interesting choice for the version of Peter Parker we leave off with at the end of No Way Home. Because Peter starts his story with nobody remembering who he is. Aunt May is gone, Tony Stark is gone, and even MJ and Ned have no memory of him. Cretton has already called this a back-to-basic Spider-Man story, and that fits because this is Peter at his most alone. He's shown he can handle big Marvel action, but his strongest work usually comes from the more grounded stuff. Grief, pressure, and strained relationships. So the big question with Brand New Day is whether he can balance all the Spider-Man energy with a Peter who's quieter, more isolated, and emotionally vulnerable. And I think for the most part he does. Chris McKenna and Eric Sommers are back writing Spider-Man Brand New Day, and that makes sense given everything they've done already with this version of Peter Parker. They wrote Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home. So they've been there for the whole arc of him, going from his eager kid looking for approval to somebody who's lost pretty much everything in his personal life. Even though not all the other three previous films always fired on all cylinders for me, what I've always liked about their Spider-Man movies is that you can feel their comedy background in them. They came out of TV comedy, and you can see that in the way Peter's awkwardness, bad decisions, and constant scrambling become part of the humor. It never feels like jokes are just dropped in for the sake of it. They usually come from Peter being Peter. They've also done a good job across the trilogy of putting Peter's personal life in conflict with what he's supposed to do as Spider-Man. In Homecoming, he wants Tony Stark's approval. In Far From Home, he just wanted a normal school trip. In No Way Home, he wanted his old life back, and every time the cost gets bigger. Now, the action in Brand New Day is one of the biggest things that works for me. The web swinging finally feels like the kind of big open Manhattan Spider-Man stuff that I've always wanted to see in these movies, and it really does have that weight and speed to it. What I liked is that it just doesn't look flashy. It feels physical. When Spidey takes off, you can feel the momentum, and the camera work really helps sell that. It never feels like he's just floating around the city. It feels like he's actually moving through it. The combat is another huge win. A lot of it feels straight out of the Insomniac games, and I mean that in the best way. Spider-Man is using the environment, webbing up everything in sight, climbing, sliding, improvising, all the stuff that makes his fights fun to watch when they really lean into what the character can do. And then there are the bigger set pieces, which are really where the movie goes all in. The fight with the hand is one of those standout sequences in the whole movie, and the Hulk stuff has that kind of scale and danger I've been wanting to see more of. It actually feels like Hulk is being treated like a real threat again, instead of just a punchline. If I had to sum it up, I'd say the action is one of the clearest strengths of the movie. It feels more grounded, more creative, and more in tune with what Spider-Man action should actually look like. And that's because the cinematography is one of the biggest wins in the movie. This is easily the best looking Spider-Man film in a long time, and the colors, lighting, and overall look make New York feel alive. The score is also really strong. Giacchino gives the music a heavier, more emotional feel, and it fits Peter's headspace really well. I also like how Spider-Man theme feels a little broken here because that matches where Peter is in the story. If I had one issue, it's the editing, and because the movie takes a little bit to get going, and at times it feels like it's trying to fit too much in. But visually, this thing is a standout. Right now, the early critical response to Spider-Man Brand New Day is very strong. The film currently holds a 91% score on Rotten Tomatoes from 248 critics, while the verified audience score is even higher at 98% from more than 2,500 ratings. And as usual, Metacritic is more reserved, with a score of 66 out of 100 from 51 critics, placing the film in its generally favorable category. IMDb users are rating it an 8.2 out of 10 from roughly 26,000 ratings. The Letterboxd score is still forming as the film continues its international rollout, but currently sits at 4.2. It sounds about right to me. Spider-Man Brand New Day earns a 4 out of 5 from me. This is the kind of Spider-Man film I wanted for after No Way Home. It kind of gives Peter Parker real emotional weight, keeps the action grounded in his choices, and still delivers the humor, movement, and the comic book energy that makes the character work. It isn't perfect, but it understands that Spider-Man stories are strongest when Peter has something personal to lose. Destin Daniel Cretton, Tom Holland, and the writing team take that idea seriously, and the result feels like a genuine new chapter rather than another extension of an old trilogy. Now, I want to hear from you. Did Brand New Day give you the Spider-Man story you were hoping for, and where does it rank among Tom Holland's 4 solo films? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this review, hit the like button, subscribe to A Constantly Racing Mind, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the full ending explained spoiler review. You can also support the channel through Intelligent Filmgoers Apparel. The link is in the description. And before the next trip to the theater, check out the Runtime app so you know the best time to step out without missing an important scene. I'm Rob, and this is A Constantly Racing Mind, covering sci-fi, horror, action-adventure, prop culture, and all things geek. Thanks for watching, and remember, where every frame tells a story, there is always more to talk about.